All right, boys and girls, welcome back to another edition of The Big Ben Show. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can email us, as always, at bigben@fox.com. Follow me on X at bdomenech. Subscribe to my newsletter, The Transom, at thetransom.com, and magazine, The Spectator, at thespectator.com. And today, it's August in America. Everyone's out. They're out of town. They're taking their summer vacations, hopefully. Hopefully you're all doing well and you and yours are spending some time at the beach or thinking about anything other than politics. But the people who are thinking about politics are the politicians for whom the next elections are starting right now.
Trump is back, America is blessed, and Tennessee better than ever. I'm Marsha Blackburn. Here in the volunteer state, we always lead the way. And that's why I am announcing my candidacy for governor.
I've thought on it and prayed about it, and I've decided I want to serve as your next United States Senator.
I'm Nancy Mace. I'm running for governor of South Carolina. I will hold the line. I will fight for you, and I will always put South Carolina first.
Those are some of the big names that have thrown their hat into the ring in these statewide election races, which are so critical and so important, and they are big names, obviously. Nancy Mace, for her prominence in terms of her role on Capitol Hill. Marsha Blackburn, obviously a long-time serving senator and someone who was a very purposeful recruit of the Republican Party to go back and run for governor instead. And Roy Cooper, who is the hope that they have in North Carolina of taking over that seat from the Republicans. Look, it's a situation that we see every year where the process starts earlier and earlier. People throwing their hats into the ring, in the summer before anybody even really starts to pay attention. And that's because this is all about getting out ahead, raising the money, getting to work on the ground. And for Democrats, really this time around, the map is not good for them in the Senate. As much as it's a narrow lead for Republicans currently, there is not really the kind of optimism about being able to compete in as many races and in as many fronts as they would like. They are looking at trying to recruit solid people like Sherrod Brown in Ohio to try to win back a seat that he lost before. But it's one of these situations that I think is going to be very difficult for Democrats to navigate, just given the ground that they have to work on. The hopes, for instance, of going after the seat in Texas this time around after the experience last time around where they had hopes of knocking off Ted Cruz is just something where they're having to bank on a lot of different things happening within that primary in order for them to succeed. There's also, I think, a situation here, though, for Republicans where they need to not rest on their laurels. Many times in the past, in these midterm elections, Republicans have gone into them expecting that the map would play to their benefit, expecting that they would outraise and outwork the Democrats, only to find that at the end of the day, there was some race, one race, in particular that they, either had a bad recruit in or someone has a late breaking scandal. And then suddenly you have a Democratic senator from Alabama. I think personally that this time around, the Republicans are more organized and more prepared because they understand one of the big differences that is true this time around, just given the new landscape of our politics in America, namely that the Republicans have become the party of presidential elections at the same time that Democrats have become the party of midterms. With the shift in upper class voters away from the Republican Party and toward the Democratic Party, you have more engagement on that front. You also have a very active and aggressive Democratic base that knows how to work, and they have a rising and momentum-backed version of socialism that is bringing a lot of young people into the party who are finding something to believe in within it, even if it's full of lies. So Republicans can't just rest on their laurels. They have to start making the case for their ideas, something that I really haven't heard them doing yet. They have made the case for the things that appeal to their base currently, which are obviously Trump's immigration policies, the fact that the economy seems to be doing pretty well, considering some of the concerns that existed around tariffs, and also, of course, issues related to the big, beautiful bill and all the different things that were contained within there, which they've only begun to start advocating for. But from my perspective, the real risk here is that the Republican complacency could lead to real defeat for conservative values at a moment when a lot of people have the false impression that conservative values are absolutely ascendant, that they are winning the day, they're going to continue to win the day, and that as long as the Democrats are complaining about Sydney Sweeney ads and the kind of dog that she owns, that's not something that they need to worry about. Basing your argument on insanity, as I've said before, of the other side is just not a winning strategy. And it's been proven time and time again. You know, Democrats thought that was going to be the case for them in 2010, that they could demonize the Tea Party and everything that it represented and come away. And of course, we saw what happened then, a massive Republican midterm sweep. So from my perspective, what's really going on in this moment is a determination about how the set pieces are going to be for this coming midterm campaign. And I'm looking forward to hearing from these people, considering that they are a lot of experienced politicians, that they've been around for the past couple of years, that they've lived through the transition into the Trump era. And from my perspective, that's something that's going to be a lot more helpful than embracing a bunch of people who are neophytes, newbies. They like to describe themselves as outsiders, but oftentimes what that ends up really meaning is that they are rookies who've been brought up to the big leagues before they're ready to go. This is going to be a stacked field of candidates, and it's going to be interesting to watch how they go and duke it out. I'll be watching, you'll be watching, and it'll be interesting to follow on the Big Ben Show going forward. Coming up next, we have the great Brit Hume.
Stan, not all journalists are bad. You like Brit Hume, don't you?
You know damn well I like Brit Hume.
Welcome back to the Big Ben Show, and I'm happy to welcome today one of my heroes, the great Brit Hume. Brit, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
My pleasure, Ben.
I want to ask you a couple of questions as someone who has the long-time background covering the White House, aware of the responsibilities that come with being a White House correspondent, and some of the other things that are associated with that, with some of the behavior that we've seen from prominent former correspondents or journalists, who covered the White House, who are now currently wandering in the wilderness of Substack, where I, myself am okay, in terms of my own platform. But one of them in particular has garnered a good bit of attention, and that's when Jim Acosta, who, as Variety reports, the former CNN chief White House correspondent, who now hosts an independent show, has published an interview with an AI-generated avatar of Joaquin Oliver, who died at age 17 in the Parkland school shooting in 2018.
Joaquin, I would like to know what your solution would be for gun violence.
Great question. I believe in a mix of stronger gun control laws, mental health support, and community engagement. We need to create safe spaces for conversations and connections, making sure everyone feels seen and heard. It's about building a culture of kindness and understanding. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great idea, Joaquin.
Britt, so given the advancements of AI, when can we expect your series of interviews with all of the presidents?
Well, I'm a little mystified as to why he would do this. It seems to me we have enough trouble with authenticity in the news as it is, without creating fake dead people to answer questions. It just seems to me to be absurd. But I suppose in the age of AI and everybody's excited about it and talking about it and investing staggering sums of money in it, that this is an opportunity to get with the program. But I think it's better avoided.
One of the things that people have been very critical of when it comes to AI is the idea that it would be used to create disinformation, misinformation, et cetera, that it would, for instance, create statements from world leaders that they didn't actually say. And now we have the former CNN chief White House correspondent going out there and literally using a dead teenager to try to make an argument on behalf of his position on guns in America. I feel like this is a little bit of conflict.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I say, Ben, there's enough fake news out there as it is without having real fake news, if you get my drift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that one of the things that bothers me the most about this, obviously, is that we've seen CNN in particular during Acosta's time push over and over again the conversation around Russiagate as being something that was, completely legitimate, that, you were a denialist if you went against it, and that, there were all these things that would prove ultimately that it was true. You've obviously been observing, I'm sure, the things that have happened in the last couple of weeks with the release of a number of different previously classified documents regarding this. What are your thoughts on perspective on what happened there for so many years on CNN in particular, but other networks as well, that just took Russiagate as being something, as being a conspiracy that was, completely upheld by the facts in front of them?
I think it was the worst journalistic scandal of my lifetime in the news media, going back in almost 60 years. It was a complete fiasco in the end, and I think it was rooted in a sort of a knee-jerk belief that Donald Trump was such an unscrupulous and indeed even evil man that the claim that he was being aided in a meaningful way and working closely with Russia to affect the election was something they thought had to be true, that it must be true because, well, it was Trump. And that belief in him as an evil, an unprecedentedly cynical and self-absorbed political figure continues to govern the thinking about him to this day. And it is, in my view, something that has distorted our politics and our news coverage going back all these years, 9 years. And it continues to do so. It affected people's beliefs about how to cover stories that are related to Trump, but not about Trump in particular. The Hunter Biden laptop story being a good example of that. The news media felt that that the possibility of a Trump presidency was a kind of national emergency, and it was their job as the denizens of the Fourth Estate to save the country from this evil man. And thus, when the story came along that that looked like it had the possibility of tipping the election in Trump's direction, what we saw was a refusal to cover the story throughout most of the mainstream media. I was skeptical of the Trump-Russia collusion story from the beginning and said so over and over and over again because it just did not seem plausible to me, and indeed it turned out not to be true.
The reaction to the release of those documents, which obviously has been teed up for a while now, I mean, really from the time that Donald Trump got back into office, John Ratcliffe, Tulsi Gabbard, and others were tasked with, looking back at these things and what things could be now declassified. And that sort of thing had been teased, by the way, by, of course, Kash Patel in prior interviews prior to, going into the administration. But the initial reaction from, the reporters who covered the White House, including Caitlin Collins and others, was just, aren't you just doing this to distract from Epstein, which now seems to be their answer for virtually everything. An NBC reporter just explained this the other day this way.
A couple of weeks ago, Hallie, when really the headlines were dominated by the Jeffrey Epstein controversy, and then the president was sort of trying to change the topic very obviously, and in many different venues, was trying to bring up these unsubstantiated claims about the role he argues former President Obama had in the 2016 election and trying to suppress some information that he says would have been damaging if it had come to light. But it really does bear repeating. This is looking into something for which there is no evidence to back it up. And it's really, it seems, a politically motivated move.
No evidence, a politically motivated move. That's their mantra on this. Brit, if it was true that any of the things that we see in these documents happened, isn't that something that deserves to be looked into regardless of the politics?
Well, of course, and the idea that there's no evidence. Look, it may be, you can argue that there's no proof because the charges have not been proven yet. But there's an abundance of evidence that certainly, it seems to me, bears looking into. And after all, you have to ask yourself this question. How could something so wrong, so untrue, have traveled so far as the Russiagate case did? Unless it was being, worked behind the scenes by powerful people, as indeed we now believe, and I think can substantiate that it in fact was. And so I think, for these reporters to dismiss that, I mean, whoever said that stuff that you just played, that person shouldn't be anywhere near this story, nor, as far as I'm concerned, probably for any other story. I mean, that was ignorance and bias on stilts.
She's an NBC reporter covering the White House. So this is the thing that I think is worthwhile to bring up as a general matter. You talk about it being worked behind the scenes. That's something that I talk about a lot with people who are outside of the Beltway, about the difference in the attitude of people who've been inside it for a long time or covered things for a long time, and those who are receiving the news. When you are watching and receiving the information from people who are inside the Beltway, what are some of the hallmarks for you that you've noticed over the years of the idea that a story in particular is a work, is an operation, essentially, to advance the narrative, other than the obvious ones, of course, where it's just, partisan talking points and things that are pretty open. There have been a lot of things over the years where it's like, what's going on behind the scenes here? And I just try to encourage people to be perceptive consumers of the news. What are some of the things that you see along those lines that people should
well, you always
notice?
have to be on the lookout when people are ascribing their information to unnamed individuals. But beyond that, I'm always a little hesitant to believe, that everything's a conspiracy and that the deep state is in there pulling the strings and so on. There's an old adage that I don't think I can quote it exactly, but it's basically never ascribe to conspiracy as something that can be more easily explained by stupidity or incompetence. And I think that's worth keeping in mind, and I'm always hesitant to go there. But in this particular case, so much of what was being reported about the so-called Russiagate affair was attributed to intelligence sources and other such unnamed sources, which is a sort of a dead giveaway of where this stuff was coming from. And of course, reporters can be incredibly credulous. Years ago, when I started working in this business, Ben, all those years ago, long before you were born, I'm sure, a story that was attributed to unnamed sources was referred to as a dope story. And it had very little, those such stories had very little weight. Editors were always saying, can you get somebody to say this on the record? And if you couldn't do much with it. In this current era that started really with Watergate and the heroism, as it was perceived, of the reporters who broke that story, Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward at the Washington Post, unnamed sources were considered now to be more valuable because, you see, the assumption was that they're not, they're not speaking on the record, so they don't have to be so careful, and they can tell you what the real deal is. But I think it's gotten completely out of hand, and we now have a phenomenon which never used to be the case back in the old days of allowing unnamed sources to attack people, to say, well, Senator so-and-so's an idiot, said a senior aide. To me, that stuff should never be published or broadcast because it's just allowing somebody to hide behind anonymity to take a shot at somebody, and they ought to be able to stay out on the record or it doesn't get recorded.
I'm familiar with the way that this works from the perspective of Capitol Hill, which is that a group of friends gets together in the cafeteria for lunch and they have a conversation among each other. And the committee staffer says to the personal staffer, who says to the other office LD, well, I'm going to tell so-and-so that, I heard from you that this is happening. And then you just send the reporter in a loop. And at the end of the day, you've got three unnamed sources who all say something, and that has to be definitive with pure motives behind it. I mean, that's the way that it worked with the most recent attack piece in particular on John Fetterman.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think there ought to be a convention that stuff is not a meeting, but a agreed upon practice that stuff is out of bounds. That you can't get that in the paper. You'll say, well, that's the only way I can get it. Well, too bad.
Yeah, it's one thing too. I think, Britt, to say you can have an unnamed source, I think, within a story that can back up something. But they can't be the story. And we saw forever and ever in the Russia situation where it was 8 unnamed sources from the intel community say blank. And that was the story, and it would dominate the discussion in Washington for, weeks on end, whatever was in that. But there wouldn't be a single named source within it. And then they would trot out, other intel community people to these different networks and other, forums and newspapers, and basically say, well, I trusted sources within the intel community say X, and nobody puts their name behind it. Is that going to change anytime soon, or is this a situation where people are just going to refuse to learn from their mistakes?
I must say that the phenomenon of people refusing to learn from their mistakes is a hallmark of our era. We had the fiasco. I mean, the list of journalistic fiascos, of stories that turned out to be wrong, or stories that pointed everybody in the wrong direction, goes back many years, and it reached a kind of what I thought was kind of a culmination point with the collapse of the Russiagate story. But we moved on from that. We're having even further examples of refusal to learn. Hunter Biden laptop being one of them. The credulous coverage of the measures that were ordered into place to combat COVID is yet another. Yet another was, and most conspicuously, was the non-coverage of Joe Biden's obvious mental deterioration. I started saying back in 2019 that Biden, whom I'd known for a long time, was obviously senile, and it was, you'd think I'd pass gas in the middle of somebody's dinner party with the level of reaction to it. That people just, I was attacked in some quarters, and ignored in many others, as if this guy just said something completely absurd and inappropriate. And the failure to do that. Now we have journalists who did little or nothing, in many cases absolutely nothing, to look into the story, are now writing books about how it all happened. Embarrassing. And people are not, but journalists are not learning. They're not learning their lessons. They are. And the other thing is that the audience is splintered. Ben, when I got started in this business, the objective for news coverage was the widest possible audience. So you wanted coverage that was acceptable to all, or as close to all as possible. So there was a certain enforced neutrality. And if you tried to editorialize or push the limits, you couldn't get it in the newspapers. I worked for a couple of newspapers in my early days and for a wire service, and you just couldn't get that stuff out. It was unacceptable. You'd be called out for it. So that's all changed now. Everybody's appealing to a certain large, but broadly speaking, as a percentage of the population, narrow audiences, and I think, so you end up with people who are pandering to that audience.
To shift from the situation with the media to the political situation currently, we are seeing the rush of announcements from all these different people across the country who are getting into these statewide races. And we don't have to get into specifics, but, we've seen some prominent candidates, Marsha Blackburn, Nancy Mace, both deciding to run for governor in their respective states. Roy Cooper getting in to the North Carolina Senate race. This is clearly going to be a very competitive midterm cycle. How would you handicap the challenges for each side in terms of what they're going to have to deal with and navigate in the coming year in a way that prepares them for a competitive midterm?
Well, in a closely divided country, and that's what we have, these races are all close. The margins in the House and Senate are exceedingly narrow. The one in the House is almost impossibly narrow. And, the history of midterm elections in a new president, even if he's an old president, in a new president's first term, suggests that there's going to be a loss of seats for the incumbent party. Republicans afford to lose only a tiny handful of seats, which would be a good midterm under normal circumstances. But under these circumstances, it would cost Republicans control of the House, and the consequence of that would be that if the House goes Democrat, whatever legislative agenda the president may have in mind for the last 2 years of his term would be basically out the window, because nothing, his preferences are not going anywhere. And the Senate is a somewhat different situation. The map is in terms of who's up and who's not. A third of the Senate is up. Is a little bit better for the Republicans, but they're in danger of losing over there as well. And I think that's where we are, and we're going to see narrow, tight races all over the place.
Mm-hmm. There's clearly a challenge for the Democrats in terms of the extreme wing of their party, to the extent that people pay attention to what they've been saying, meaning they're clearly saying things that are well out of the mainstream of our politics. Beyond Zohran Mamdani, the squad members who are very active and the most prominent voices for the Democrats on social media, certainly more than some of the older folks, are quite radical on many things. Do you think that that's actually going to be a drag on them?
Yes.
Or are Republicans... Go ahead.
No, I absolutely do. I mean, on issue after issue, you'd think that the 2024 presidential election would have shown this. On issue after issue, the Democrats are espousing positions that could not possibly command a majority. I mean, men and women's sports being a very clear example of that. And
the policy of New York City.
On.
But Britt, the policy of New York City, if Mamdani wins, he wants to make it essentially a sanctuary city that will pay for people to fly there and pay for their quote unquote gender affirming care, transgender operations. That's something that I thought would be laughed out of our politics, as recently as just a few years ago. And certainly after 2024, I would think Democrats would want to ditch it. And yet you have Elizabeth Warren coming out and just endorsing him the other day.
Yeah, endorsing Mamdani, yeah, I saw that. What I say about that is that it's an example of something that I've noticed over the years, which is it's amazing the persistence and shelf life of bad ideas. I mean, Mamdani is basically a communist. Communism has failed everywhere it's tried, utterly failed. The examples of that are glaring and everywhere apparent when communism has been tried. Of course, you'll hear from communism's advocates that, well, it's never been fully tried in its purest form. That's probably because it can't be. It doesn't work, never has, and never will. And yet here we have, people who are espousing it to this day, and in its lighter form, socialism, that's never really worked anywhere either. The perverse effects of it are everywhere apparent. And yet here we have, socialists doing well and inspiring young people, for God's sake.
Britt, for the Republicans, is there a risk here, though, of hubris, of thinking that because the Democrats are so crazy, they don't really need to do more to make the case for all the different policies that they passed? They obviously had this legislative success that Trump was pushing for. But to be honest, I'm not sure that the American people really know what's in that yet. And I haven't really seen them selling it all that well yet.
I see James Carville is arguing, and he's had some successes over the years, that what the Democrats need to do in this midterm is to run against the so-called big beautiful bill. The premise of that, Ben, in my view, is that the big beautiful bill, which is, you look at opinion polls, it's underwater. When it's in effect, will have noticeable and negative effects. And it's not at all clear to me that that's true. I think that when it takes effect, the things that are being, for example, the throwing people off Medicaid, of course, that's always articulated as throwing people off their health care. Of course, it's not health care, it's health insurance to begin with, which may or may not mean health care. And it also is the case that the people who are going to be excised from the Medicaid rolls are in a huge percentage of the cases, at least as the legislation specifies, are people who shouldn't be on those rolls anyway. I can't believe that's going to be unpopular. But we'll see. My own view of it is that the key thing in that whole bill was the avoidance of a major tax increase, which would have affected everybody and nobody would be liking it. And that's basically what Democrats voted for, was to allow that tax increase to go into effect. So I'm not sure that that's going to, in the end, when people get down to it, that their support for that proposition is going to be popular. So we'll see.
The initial run here of this Trump presidency, the second Trump presidency, has obviously been moving at an insane pace. What is your thought on whether that's sustainable or not for him, and whether that's the right approach given the kind of dynamics that you're talking about for the midterm and the likelihood of Republicans losing the House historically?
Well, I think he's pushing the limits and going as fast as he can, because I think he figures that they only have a couple of years to do what they're trying to do. So you see this blizzard of executive orders that have come out, some of which will be upheld by the courts and a number of which probably will not. I think there's a significant possibility, Ben, that the tariffs that he has imposed using these emergency powers that are under a law which specifies a major national emergency as a condition. It's not clear. It's never been used to impose tariffs, and it's not clear that the courts will hold that it's a valid national emergency for those purposes anyway. I think the Court of Appeals, before which those cases are being heard, that court, I think, is very likely, overwhelmingly likely, to rule against him, and the matter would then go to the Supreme Court. And it's not clear to me that the Supreme Court, despite the number of appointees of his that are on it, are going to uphold his powers in that regard, at which point this whole tariffs regime may collapse. And it's possible that with it, any deals that were struck when it was in effect might go by the boards as well, because countries that were involved in it will say, well, wait a minute, we're reacting to a law that is, or to measures that were null and void, so the agreements are out the window. So he's got a lot at stake, and he's got a million balls in the air, as many as I've ever seen. And as I say, I think he was in a hurry, because I think he anticipated the midterm would be tough. And the last 2 years of a president's terms, particularly if he's had a term before this one, are not normally very legislatively productive, and there'll be a limit to what he can do. He'll continue with the executive orders, I'm sure, and only some of them will be upheld by the courts.
Mm-hmm. Last question for you, Brit. You obviously have the perspective of somebody who's seen the change and shift within the politics of Washington and within the conversation between politicians over the years. I know that we have this sort of false or inflated, I think, memory of the days when politicians would break bread together and get along, and that there would be less acrimony and that type of thing. Do you think that there's any possibility that we ever get back to something resembling that, or is the truth that we've now entered a period of time where the combination of the internet, the partisanship of the country, et cetera, prevents people from crossing any of those lines, and really, essentially forces a situation of gridlock?
Well, I think we're going to be in this for a while. But look, I think a popular president with good results, who does not offend everybody that doesn't agree with him or her, if it turns out to be a woman sometime soon, would make all the difference. But it's hard to do that, and it's particularly hard to do that in the age of Trump. And I would say this about Trump: I don't think he's well understood by most in the media and by a lot of his opponents. Not well understood at all. But I think the cold fact is that the resistance to him remains strong. And the country is thereby very deeply divided, as divided as I think it's been since maybe the Civil War.
What's the number one thing that they don't understand about him?
Well, they don't understand that he's not an evil man. They don't understand that everything he does is not corrupt. Their view is they can't look. This is the level of antipathy. I mean, there's always a fair amount of that going on. There always has been. But in his case, it is beyond anything I can ever remember seeing. And I came along when I was first paying attention to politics. Lyndon Johnson was president, and because of the Vietnam War, the antipathy toward him became very strong. Hey, LBJ, how many kids have you killed a day? Gives you a taste of that. And Nixon similarly had tremendous opponents, and people who were never reconciled to him. And so but nothing compares to the feeling about Trump and everything associated with Trump. They can't. They hate the sight of him, and they automatically assume everything he does is the wrong thing for the wrong reasons, and that's something that's beyond what I've ever experienced.
Well, you've experienced it over the years, and we appreciate your insight. The great Brit Hume, thank you so much for joining the Big Ben Show today.
Glad to talk to you, Ben, as always.
Welcome back anytime. We'll be back with more right after this.
Stop the ad! That is being racist!
And we're back on the Big Ben Show, where I'm happy to welcome my guest today, Kat Rosenfield, culture writer at the Free Press and author of the upcoming book, How to Survive in the Woods, coming out March 10th, 2026. You can follow her on X at Kat Rosenfield. Kat, I want your reaction to the reality of now living in Sydney Sweeney's decade.
This is Sydney Sweeney's America, right? I'm sort of enjoying everything about this moment, just because I think that it represents a sort of a mass unclenching from all of the anxieties that have gripped us for the past 5 to 10 years.
A conscious uncoupling, if you would.
Yeah, or that. Yeah, I feel like everybody's metaphorical sphincters are very relaxed right now, and it's great.
You know, the thing that I thought when I first saw the ad was, first off, you know, whoever is doing this knows exactly what they're doing. But also, second off, because that's obvious, why do you feel that people still rise to the bait?
Oh, I don't think people can help themselves. And I think that's true kind of across the board. You're, I think, absolutely right that people who created this ad knew that it was going to cause some kind of a backlash. And it created a moment to have a conversation, both, you know, in terms of people freaking out from, you know, certain corners of the extremely online left, but also for people in the mainstream or on the right to say, yeah, we hear you freaking out and we don't care.
Yeah. Why do you think that the left wants Sydney Sweeney, or the very online left wants Sydney Sweeney to be right coded? Because she is, to an extent, obviously, but they've only made her more so. And that to me doesn't seem like the best way to maybe win back normal straight male voters, which is what I thought they wanted to do as a political movement going into the upcoming elections.
There's a little bit of a revealed preference thing here going on, right? It's, you know, they say they want that, but they don't want to do the things that it would take to make that happen because, you know, that's uncomfortable and distasteful. As for why Sydney Sweeney is perceived as right-coded, I think that that's a function of this phenomenon that I call fandom politics, where everything has to be team affiliated. Everything has to be understood as somehow partisan coded. And this is why, like, exercise is now right-wing coded. Having interestingly colored hair is considered left-wing coded. Even if you just like pink and you like having pink hair because you think it's pretty, no, like, people are going to perceive you to be making some kind of political statement with that. And similarly, Sydney Sweeney, who's conventionally attractive, white, blonde, you know, big boobs, is going to be perceived, if she's going to be perceived as anything, she's going to be perceived as somehow right-coded. And of course, the political right isn't exactly unhappy at the idea that, like, the hottest, biggest boobed actress in the world today is somehow like belongs to them in some way, right?
Well, I think that one of the things that's so funny about it to me is that if you look at her acting in terms of the roles that she's had, you know, in the past, a lot of it is stuff that is, you know, favorited by, you know, America's elites. I mean, you know, the stuff that's, you know, she's done some sort of purposefully trashy stuff too, that is, you know, the kind of thing that could win Razzies and the like. But the point is that, like, the thing that really changed her career was her role in White Lotus, which is obviously something that is a lot more coded to, you know, elite left audiences, I would say, than it is to the right. So, like, why does that happen, you know, to someone like her? You know, because I remember when they were making the similar jokes they made about her at Hooters on SNL, that they were doing with, you know, the likes of Katy Perry, you know, years ago. And so it just seems weird to me that they would want to push her in that direction.
Yeah, I think it has less to do with who Sweeney is as a person or as an actress, because as you said, she does take on a variety of roles, and one of the interesting things is that she's actually quite serious about her craft. I've
Yeah.
seen many interviews with her where she describes what she does to prepare for a role, and one of the most recent things that she did, I don't think the movie's out yet, but she plays a boxer, and she transformed her body and her appearance for this role. Like she takes her work very, very seriously in a way that is, outside of politics. But
there's also great buzz about this movie, the one that she was being heckled at, Americana, I believe it's called, that has Paul Walter Hauser, this kind of neo-Western, supposed to be Coen-esque.
Yes, I can't
and
wait
so
to see that. It's going to be so
yeah,
good.
exactly. So that's the kind of role where, I look at that and I'm looking forward to it because I know that she's going to be serious about it. And that's something that it just seems lost in this situation. It's like, because the depiction that I think most of the very online lefties want to have of what the right wants from women is something that you've written about repeatedly, the sort of should your husband tie your shoes effect, where there's this thing that I think that's going on there where we want kind of dumb princesses or something on the right, that the ballerina farm effect and things like that, where Sweeney is not actually that. She pretends to be that sometimes. She acts like that sometimes on purpose, but it's one of these things where that's clearly not what she actually is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing is that she has I don't know, there's like the signifiers around her that really don't have anything to do with who she is as a person or who she is as an actress, but it has a lot to do with her aesthetic. And it also has a lot to do with the kind of aura around her in terms of how she projects her sexuality. I wrote a little bit about this for Pirate Wires. I think that she has this manner, and it's especially kind of on display in the American Eagle ad campaign, which I think we should understand as also a role. You're not necessarily seeing Sydney Sweeney the person, you're seeing Sydney Sweeney the actress. She's selling a product, she's behaving a certain way, but she projects this particular type of sexuality that is very casual, very comfortable, very confident, very much catering to and comfortable with the male gaze. It's basically like, I know you're looking at me because you're a heterosexual man and I look like this, and that's fine. I am not fussed about it. And I think that attitude towards sex and towards straight men has come to be seen as inherently right-wing coded, because for so many years, the message from the political left has been that heterosexual male sexuality is like demonic and predatory and needs to be both stigmatized and corrected.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that, the moment when, I just want to make the comparison to the moment when Taylor Swift shifted from dating the kind of men that she used to date to dating Travis Kelce, there was obviously so much attention paid to that, and Swift is her own kind of unicorn. But was there a backlash that I missed to that was basically saying that dating a football player is unacceptable? And if not, why is that?
I don't actually think there was one. And the backlash that I saw actually seemed to come more from the right, insofar as people kind of turned against Swift. But I'm not sure if it was because of dating the football player or if it was because she had become a little bit more of an explicitly political creature over the past few years. And so the fact that she was, kind of coming into their house, into their football house, and dating the hot football player was perceived as some kind of encroachment in some way. At least that was the sense that I got.
I think you're right about that. I also think that part of it is that of which Kelce she chose, meaning that she chose the one who kind of codes as like a white rapper, as opposed to the one who looks like he is going to live in the woods and only wear flannel. So I just think that there's an element of that too that was kind of made it more acceptable. It's just interesting to me because it's such a different response from the left to people doing things that could be considered right coded.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the difference between Taylor Swift and Sydney Sweeney is Taylor Swift made her politics known. And so people don't have to guess, they don't have to assign. They can just say, yeah, she's one of us. One of the interesting things in the wake of the Sydney Sweeney ad campaign for American Eagle is that people started, it was like it was this jolt. It was, wait, what is she? Like, who is she? Who is she politically? People started going, hunting for her voter registration to try and figure it out. People are very uncomfortable with having any mystery surrounding what a celebrity's politics might be.
Yeah. And certainly, past things that her family has done, which I was aware of, indicated that they were certainly right of center, perhaps. The conversation around the Coldplay couple that you wrote about for the Free Press, I think that conversation is something that really shows that we haven't learned entirely from some of the mistakes of the past. What was your reaction to the internet freak out around that?
So I thought that there were two interesting things going on there. Almost immediately, you saw this schism where on the one hand, there was the cultural moment, there were the memes, and this couple passed into legend in a way that had very little to do with who they were and everything to do with the kind of absurd slapstick physicality of this moment that was like, you could very easily remix and riff on it. You could very easily replicate it, them diving out of frame, turning their backs. It was funny, even though uncomfortable, but funny. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, there was the public shaming component that very much centered on trying to punish and extract consequences from these two people as individuals. And the thing that I focused on when I wrote about this was the latter thing, because I think it was very patently obvious that people were taking an awful lot of delight in the idea that they were going to inflict harm on these people. Mm-hmm. They were going to inflict, serious damage, personal, professional, reputational, and so on, because these people had become avatars for some social ill, in this case, adultery. And so they deserve to be made an example of. And I do think that anytime we pass into a moment like that, where people are taking an enormous amount of pleasure in the idea that they're inflicting distress on a stranger, especially, when it's somebody who's not in their community, there's no sense of proportion to the shaming, and it's just driven by bloodlust and schadenfreude. I think that that's bad, basically, not to put too fine a point on it.
It's not even like they're rivals in your high school or something like that. You don't know who these people are. You don't know what's going on in their lives. I mean, it's one of these anyway. I think that you're completely right that that's something that it's still hanging around the internet. It feels like a Gawker era problem that is just not going away. Do you think that there's any hope that things like this will decrease, or is this just so fundamentally base human activity, trollish, etc., that is just going to always be with us?
I sort of wonder about that, because the impulse to shame obviously has been with us for a long time. For as long as human beings have created societies, we've also had public shaming. And I think that it does have its uses. It's a mechanism of social enforcement for people who do things that are corrosive to the social trust. That makes sense in the confines of a community. Once you make it so that it's something that you're doing to people who have nothing to do with you, who live in a state you've never even been to, and who you only know about because there was a video of them on the internet, something kind of breaks about the function of shaming. The machine becomes something else, and its purpose becomes something else. Do we have a future where that doesn't happen? I don't know, because on the one hand, the internet is not going back in the bag. On the other hand, I do think that for people who grew up in a moment where there were never not video cameras around, where you could never not have your behavior broadcast to the entire world at the drop of a hat, I don't know that that's necessarily going to lead to better behavior, but I think it is going to lead people to develop antibodies against caring what a bunch of people on the internet think about them.
It's just very odd to me because it's one of these things where I understand the first part, the humor part, totally get it. That was going to happen. But it still seems weird to me that, there's more shame directed at these random people than like Hunter Biden and what he did with his, brother's widow. I don't know. I just think that there should be a sense of proportion there in terms of behavior. So let's go out on this. You obviously write regularly about the elements within our relationships that have been changed by technology. Do you think that in an internet era, we are ever going to have a point where we get back to some kind of sense of romance between two people when they meet, regardless of affiliation? I just feel like that's something that has been killed by these apps, by everything else, and really doesn't seem to have any promise of returning in terms of, when I was dating women in the past, writing long letters to them and emails, when as opposed to having conversations that seem, just ridiculously repetitive and emoji based, even among adults. Is there any hope of getting back to a point of romance in an internet era?
I think so. I think that it just relies on people being willing to get off the internet and get back into the real life meet space, and to be willing to risk the discomforts that are associated with that. One of the things, as you were saying about the apps, is that it creates this kind of gamified sense of romance where it's more like shopping. You're going to check a box and you're going to let the algorithm feed you what you have said that you want. But as anybody who's ever fallen in love in real life knows, what you think you want and what you actually want are not necessarily going to be the same thing. And when you take dating onto the apps, you eliminate the possibility of sparking that kind of connection. And I do think you're right that what we've seen a sort of a loss of romance, so that that has killed things to a certain extent. But I see like younger people, the sort of the Gen Z and the one below them. I guess they're not really old enough to date yet, but they are increasingly not interested in the apps. They're like bringing back IRL in real life. And I think that it's going to take a moment. It's going to take a moment to reacclimate, because the thing about real life is there's friction and it's uncomfortable. And we have really moved away from friction in this sort of digital driven age. Everything is disembodied. We've convenienced ourselves into paralysis where we find like any kind of conflict increasingly intolerable. So it's going to take a minute to rebuild the ability to tolerate that once you go back out into the real world. But I think that people want to, and the desire is everything. The desire can drive the change.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an element that I hadn't thought of, which is that with the kind of gamification of this, if you have even a minor argument with someone, you can just turn it off. You can just end it, and or block them or do whatever you want. And which is something that you can't just do in real life, at least not easily. And that's something that I think is essential to figuring out whether you can actually make that work or not.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking as you were saying that about the fact that to a certain extent, we've seen a leaching into actual real life relationships, actual culture, these norms that started online where you can, at the click of a button, just kind of make somebody disappear. And I think that maybe does have something to do with the prevalence of estrangement now as compared with in previous eras. Like we have a lot more people going no contact with their families over some trivial disagreement, usually over politics, but not necessarily. And I'm not sure that would have happened without the internet setting a baseline, not just in terms of the ability to silence people and kind of, remove them from your space, remove them from your view, but also to create the illusion of like limitless opportunities to have other better relationships. Because there's a whole sea of people out there and you can see them all the time.
Yeah. No, I think you're completely right on that point. Kat Rosenfield is on X at Kat Rosenfield. She's a culture writer at the Free Press, author of the upcoming book, How to Survive in the Woods, which is out in March of 2026. Kat, thanks so much for joining the Big Ben Show.
Thanks for having me.
Let's wrap things up with the grab bag. You have doubtlessly seen the news that the NFL and ESPN are entering into a new partnership together. At least they've agreed upon one in which the NFL network is going to become part of ESPN, NFL Fantasy is going to become part of ESPN, and most importantly, the NFL Red Zone is going to become part of ESPN. Of course, in exchange, this is a deal that's going to be worked out involving a lot of different moving parts. It isn't a done deal yet, but this is a huge deal for fans of the NFL in particular. And there's a lot of different questions that it raises. Pro Football Talks, Mike Florio has pointed out that this could change the way ESPN covers the NFL in the same way that it has changed their way to be invested in partners with the NBA, where you're not entirely sure whether their reporters are going to be affected by the fact that they have, essentially a shared invested interest in making the league a success, and whether they're telling us the full story about what's going on with some of these teams or just becoming promo artists for them. There was another announcement paired with this that also caused some consternation online, and that was the hiring of an influencer, a social media influencer, 22 years old. Her name's Katie Fenney. She used to work for the Washington Commanders. She has 14 million followers, and she's basically going to be shepherding their social media. It's kind of a desperate play to bring in somebody young and talented to do the things that the old hats at ESPN can't do. Some people were upset about this online because they say it's something a little less serious. My attitude is more in line with that from the folks over at Barstool Sports, and pardon my take.
Listen, if you can do social media and get numbers for Sam Howell's Washington Commanders,
well, that's actually that's true.
Then you're probably doing something right. I saw a lot of people getting mad because they're upset that ESPN is going towards this type of content instead of their traditional intelligent content, such as having Shannon Sharp and Stephen A. Smith scream at each other for 4 hours.
See, the thing about this is ESPN's product is so bad. You can walk into a sports bar anywhere in America today, see it on, and know what all the different commentators are saying because they say the same things. It's not interesting. It's not a good product. And they can no longer depend on the fact that they're the only place that you can find the highlights that you want to see. But this is the most important part of this new arrangement. Do not mess with my Red Zone. Red Zone is the best product in sports. It is the most important thing to own if you are at all a fan of sports. And if you mess with that product, if you inject ads into it, if you put more personalities into it, if you inject any kind of, people screaming at each other for 4 hours during the games into it, that is going to be unacceptable. We will be marching in the streets. Don't touch my Red Zone. You've been listening to another edition of The Big Ben Show. You can email us, as always, at bigben@fox.com. We'll be back with more next week to dive back into the fray.